Much for joining us this afternoon. We are planning on going over kind of the high-level findings from our report on school breakfast and school lunch participation today, and kind of talking about some of the policy implications as well. Next slide. So many of you who are on the call probably are very familiar with our school breakfast scorecard, which we normally release every February, which looks at school breakfast participation in comparison to lunch. And school breakfast participation has historically lagged behind lunch participation, and that's why the report has been structured that way. But this year we decided to do the report a little bit different because we wanted to provide a comprehensive look at what's been going on with the school breakfast and school lunch programs since the pandemic hit. So this report includes both breakfast and lunch, and it also looks at 3 years of data instead of just 2. So we start with the 2018-2019 school year because we want to give a snapshot of what participation looked like before the pandemic hit. And then we also look at 2019-2020 because that's when schools shuttered in March. And so it gives you a sense of what happened the first year of the pandemic, even though the impact was not through the entire course of the year. And the last year that we look at is last school year, which is the most recent data that we have. And that's when schools continued to do remote or hybrid options. And nearly all schools were doing some kind of remote or hybrid options during some point last school year. And it definitely had an impact on participation in the nutrition program. Next slide. So the meal programs that we looked at are a little bit different as well. So normally we would just look at school breakfast and the National School Lunch Program. But this time around, because so many schools were providing meals through the Seamless Summer option and the Summer Food Service Program option, that data is included in the report. And just so that you're aware, the Seamless Summer option, those numbers are reported as part of the school breakfast program if it's breakfast, or as part of the National School Lunch Program if it were lunches. So they're reflected there, and USDA does not separate out the data. The other really important thing for people to understand is because the Summer Food Service Program can be operated by schools and other local government agencies, as well as private nonprofits like YMCAs and Boys and Girls Clubs and food banks, the data includes meals served by those organizations. Anyone who's participating in the Summer Food Service Program and sponsoring it during last school year or in the spring of the previous school year, those numbers include participation by non-school sponsors of summer food as well. Next slide. And one last thing that I just wanted to mention as we dig into the data is that we have a focus on total participation as opposed to just free and reduced price, which is how we normally look at data. And that's because so many schools were offering free meals to all students using the child nutrition waivers and using the Summer Food Service Program or the Seamless Summer option. So I just wanted to elevate that as well. And then when we look at breakfast participation, you can see that there was a drop in breakfast participation during the pandemic. So prior to the pandemic hitting, we had about 14.6 million children, and that's total children, free, reduced price, and paid, receiving school breakfast on an average school day. The next year, there was a slight drop, and that was in part because school breakfast was on track to increase participation before the pandemic hit. And then when the pandemic hit, participation dropped a bit. And you can see that it dropped again in 2020, 2021. And so that was about a 5% decrease in participation that we saw. We had about 18 states, though, that saw an increase in participation in school breakfast, and that was in large part driven by the grab-and-go models that we're able to participate in, offering breakfast and lunch to all students at no charge, really had a big impact in reducing the impact of the pandemic on access to school breakfast. Next slide. Okay, and then if you look at lunch participation, that is where we saw the biggest drop in participation. So we went from about 29 million kids participating in school breakfast prior to the pandemic. And after last school year, after 2 years of the pandemic, we saw participation drop to 19.8. And that's about a 30% drop in participation by all students. And there was only one state that actually saw an increase in lunches that were served from 2018 to 2019, and that was Wyoming. So they were able to actually increase participation at a time when every other state and nationally we saw dramatic drops in participation. Next slide. Okay, so this slide actually gives you a good snapshot of what was happening on participation across the years and across the programs. And you can see that breakfast, there was a drop, which had a negative impact on access to those meals. And lunch had a drop as well, but their drop was much more dramatic. And they also started from a much higher level of participation. So, they lost about 10,000 or 10 million kids. Breakfast did not lose that many kids, but they also started at a much lower level of participation before the pandemic hit. Next slide. And so most of you have been tracking the school breakfast scorecard over time, know that one of the big things that we do in the report is we compare breakfast participation to lunch participation. And we actually set a national benchmark of serving at least 70 low-income children who receive free or reduced price school meals for every 100 who receive lunch. And so ironically, last year, that benchmark, which actually includes free, reduced priced, and paid, not just free and reduced priced, we did hit over 70. But it was not driven by the breakfast increase that we have been working towards for so long. It was actually driven by the drop that we just talked about in the school lunch program. And so, even though in some ways we would have celebrated if the programs were operating as they normally did, and we hit that benchmark. But because the benchmark was actually driven by the lunch participation, it really is not something to celebrate from the last school year. Next slide, please. Okay, so as we think about last school year and the current school year and the upcoming school year, we are going to have to get back to normal at some point, and we really need school lunch participation to go back up, of course, and we want to get breakfast participation up to those levels of lunch. And so over the last decade, what has really driven kind of an ongoing year after year increase in school breakfast participation has been breakfast after the bell model. And that is when you take school breakfast out of the cafeteria, you have grab and go carts, or you deliver breakfast to the classroom, and you make it much more accessible to all kids, and you make it part of the school day. And that just has a dramatic impact on breakfast access. We've seen that in school district across school district, from school district to school district, from state to state, when states have implemented breakfast after the bell legislation and mandate. So we're going to be focused on breakfast after the bell as a key strategy to ensure access to breakfast in the upcoming years as well. Next slide. The report also looks at community eligibility a little bit. And for those of you who are tracking community eligibility, it's kind of an interesting time because so many schools have been providing free meals to all students using the child nutrition waivers. It just has kind of reinforced the value of being able to feed all students at no charge. And prior to the pandemic, we had about 1 in 3 schools nationwide who were serving school breakfast and lunch at no charge to all students using this community eligibility option, which allows high poverty schools to offer breakfast and lunch free of charge to all students. It does require schools to hit a certain level of poverty within the school, and then the reimbursement is still determined based on the poverty levels within the school. But community eligibility was kind of the first thing that shined a light on how important offering meals at no charge to all students could be for schools, for students, for school nutrition operations. And now that we've been offering meals to students at no charge for about a year and a half, there is even more energy and more momentum and more positive thinking around providing those meals to all kids at no charge. Next slide. So I just wanted to elevate one policy thing that is on the horizon that many of you are probably familiar with, and that is the Build Back Better Act. And so this passed out of the House. The Senate continues to look at it and negotiate it and talk about it. And, we are still very focused on it and think that it creates an important opportunity to strengthen and expand access to the federal nutrition programs. And it includes a number of provisions. One is to expand community eligibility, which would allow make more schools eligible for community eligibility, and also increase the funding for it by increasing the multiplier from 1.6 to 2.5. So more schools would find it financially viable to do it. And it also includes a statewide community eligibility option, which we think would be incredible for a number of states who would be able to move to free school meals for all. It also includes a summer EBT program for kids who rely on free and reduced price school meals during the school year. And that would have a huge impact on reducing the summer hunger gap. And it includes money for school kitchen grants and for Healthy School Meal Incentive Demonstration Project. And these investments would be critical to supporting the school nutrition programs as we recover from the pandemic. So I just wanted to elevate the Build Back Better Act and the opportunity that it would create to really invest and expand on the school nutrition programs and reduce the summer hunger gap. Next slide. And as I mentioned earlier, schools have been able to shift to provide meals to kids the way they needed to be provided during the pandemic. And the reason why that happened is because Congress gave USDA the authority to issue waivers at the start of the pandemic to be able to ensure access to the meals, to be able to support school nutrition operations, and to be able to ensure that the meals are being served in a safe way. Some of those waivers include being able to offer grab and go meals for parents to be able to pick up meals for their children, the pieces around offering free meals through the summer food service program or through the Seamless Summer option, flexibility around monitoring, and you can click on this link for a complete list of the waivers, but they really did make a huge difference in ensuring that kids were able to get access to meals, and the drop in participation that we saw would have been even more dramatic without these waivers. And the fact that we were still able to serve millions of kids, even during a pandemic, I think is a huge testament to all the hard work that school nutrition operators, as well as community-based organizations and parks and rec agencies and local government agencies really put into making sure that kids would continue to have access during a time of economic and health crisis. Next slide. So as part of putting together this report, we actually survey state agencies and ask them about the data, but we also ask them about pieces that are really important for what's going on right now within the school nutrition programs. And you can see a quote about the need for waivers from our friends of the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, which kind of underscores the importance of extending those waivers. And we still need the waivers. Schools are still struggling with supply chain and staffing challenges. And we're going to need these waivers as the nation recovers, because the way school nutrition programs operate is they are much stronger financially if they have higher participation. And the fact that participation has been lower, and the fact that the pandemic has created new challenges and new costs for school nutrition departments, it's going to take a while for them to recover, and we need those waivers to be extended, because as it stands right now, they would end on USDA's waiver authority would end on June 30th this year. Next slide. And I just wanted to elevate one other quote that we got from our friends at the Louisiana Department of Education, who really kind of talked through the importance of the waivers as well. So I wanted to share that quote as well. Next slide. And then I want to pass it over to my friend Sam over at the YMCA, who's going to give a little bit of information about what the waivers mean for WISE and other nonprofits. And as I mentioned, those meals that were served last school year by those groups are actually represented in this report. So Sam, take it away.
Thanks, Crystal, and happy to be here today with everyone. I really appreciated going over some of those numbers, and it sort of um, underscored the urgency of waivers to continue this summer to make sure that um, summer and non-school sponsors and schools themselves can really have all the innovative and necessary ways to serve effectively. So I'm Sam Chase, and I'm with the YMCA of the USA, the National Resource Office for the 2,700 Ys around the country. And as we mentioned, we are a community-based sponsor. We run sites around the country. And with the pandemic waivers, those YMCA sites actually doubled in many communities over the last 2 years. Um, what we want to underscore is that without the waivers, we really can't move back to back to regular order, and that if the waivers are not extended through the summer, we know that millions of kids will miss out on meals. It's really troubling. So WISE, YMCA's, like so many other non-school sponsors and school sponsors, are feeling a major sense of uncertainty right now. With, as like Crystal said, the waivers expire on June 30th, which is the beginning of summer, or for many WISE, it's the middle of summer in some of our southern states. And the uncertainty is plugging up all of our processes. So we don't know how to plan for the number of sites we're going to run this summer. Will it be 10? Will it be 25? How to account for staffing needs? How to account for required trainings, signing of contracts, and then, of course, adjusting for supply chain shortages and also inflated cost. As we work with our school partners, what has turned it in many communities is kind of handoff from schools to community-based providers during the summer months, that is just filled with uncertainty because no one knows which of those waivers will be enacted. Another serious problematic reality is that for some YMCA's, the waivers, like area eligibility or site monitoring, either for long or distance, are what allowed the Ys to operate during the pandemic and serve their communities in need. So the fear is that if waivers are not extended, then you actually will see Ys unable to participate. We also know that we're a large national network, but many smaller summer providers will just opt out with this uncertainty. So that kind of gets back to what I was saying before about just millions of kids losing out on access to meals this summer. So we're planning the best we can, but we're really working with FRAC and other partners to call on Congress to give USDA the waiver authority to extend the pandemic waivers. We know that USDA has used this authority in a judicious way, that they've been innovative in responding to new challenges for the pandemic and the aftermath. And we know that an extension through the summer and into next school year really is what's going to be necessary to get us back on track. We know USDA is well equipped to assess the state of the pandemic and recover and respond appropriately. So we're really hopeful that Congress is able to include that authority in the March 11th, the next funding bill, so that we can continue to serve kids this summer. And the urgency approaches, but we're really happy to be in it with so many anti-hunger advocates, and look forward to pushing them forward this coming summer. Crystal, I don't know if you wanted to add anything else on that need for the waiver extensions.
Yeah, no, and if you, Naomi, if you move to the next slide, and we are thrilled to be working with the YMCA and a number of other national partners to try and call on Congress to extend the nationwide authority. So there's a couple resources that are posted on the slide. First, the report that we talked through, we are definitely using that and talking about it because I think it really does argue for the need for the extension of the waivers. And so that is definitely something to point to, the fact that participation has gone down by 30%, the fact that school districts are still struggling with supply chain issues and staffing issues, and that really schools need additional support in order to be able to continue to feed kids and to operate the program. So the other piece that's another advocacy piece is that, not surprisingly, national, state, and local organizations feel very strongly that the waiver needs to be extended. And a couple of weeks ago, we worked with the YMCA and other partners to do this national, state, and local organization waiver sign-on letter, calling on Congress to extend the waiver authority. And so you can take a look at that. If you have an organization that's not a government agency that can sign on to it, we are still accepting organizations to sign on to it. And if you haven't already, definitely share it with your congressional delegation, because we're going to be doing everything we can and pulling out all the stops to make sure that these waivers are extended, because we know how important it is, both for schools next school year, but as Sam mentioned, we don't want summer food sponsors to wake up on July 1st and have to operate completely different nutrition programs. And the last resource that we have on the slide is kind of a complete list of waivers. So if you don't have them all memorized, or if you have any questions about which waivers have been issued this school year and when they expire, you can actually click on that and you'll be able to see the different waivers that USDA has been able to offer this year to make sure that these programs have been able to operate and serve kids. And with that, Nomi, I guess we can hand it over and open it up to Q&A.
Sure, Crystal. I see we've received one question in the chat box.
Okay. So for summer EBT, would there be any stipulation for students who participate in either SSO or SFSP? Do you see summer EBT being a hurdle because of those two programs designed to cover meals for that population, or could it still go through because SSO and SFSP don't allow as many meals to be served in MSLP? So I think the question is about the Build Back Better pieces. And just so that everybody knows, for this summer, because we have been operating under the pandemic, states are going to be able to provide summer benefits through the pandemic EBT program. So we'll be looking at that this summer, and that will provide an opportunity to give families additional nutrition resources this summer. That program, and also the way we would see summer EBT and would like summer EBT to operate in the future, would be that it would be an additional resource, and that would be a complement to the seamless summer option and the summer food service program. And as we look ahead to recovering from the pandemic, we are very excited to see kids getting summer meals at summer sites and summer programming and enrichment, because we know what a tremendous impact the pandemic has had on kids' social, emotional, and educational impact. And summer programs can play a really important role in overcoming that.
Great, thank you, Crystal. There's another question in the Q&A box, and to the person who asked if we can share the waiver links, the links from this resources slide, while Crystal is speaking, I'll plop into the chat box for everyone to access.
And Nomi, was there another question in the chat, or was that the question?
Oh, sorry, we're in the Q&A now. It's a question, are there other advocacy efforts you'd suggest to state governments / agencies?
Sure. Well, so we know that there is going to be a Dear Colleague letter circulated. And so one of the things that people can also do is ask their House members to sign on to the Dear Colleague letter, which is going to the Appropriations Committee, because the hope is to get this into the omnibus, which Congress needs to pass to keep the government going after March 11th. So we can also include a link to that and information to that in the follow-up materials, because that is just getting finalized today.
Great, thank you so much, Crystal. We received another question. Do you think it might be better to go about this in a congregate versus non-congregate feeding way? Parents don't have a lunch break long enough to go home from work, pick up their kids, wait for them to eat, and then bring them home and get them back to work. Thoughts?
Uh, I guess I don't quite understand the question, but what we're looking at for this summer is for the waivers to get extended so that when sites need to offer non-congregate meals and grab and go meals, they'll be able to do it for this summer. So that is kind of what we're, thinking will happen for this summer, because we think that those programs are going to be needed. And I think we're all looking and trying to understand what needs to happen to the summer nutrition programs and summer EBT as we recover from the pandemic to make sure that kids have access to meals during the summer.
Great, thank you. I think we have time for one last question that we received through the Q&A. And the question is, what kind of advocacy is FRAC doing around free and reduced price meal applications?
Sure. Well, so there's a couple of things that we're doing. We've put together a guide on collecting free and reduced price school meal applications. We've done webinars on it to support that. And then we also, I think one of our big focuses is, making sure that more kids are able to be directly certified for free school meals outside of the application process. So we were very excited to see the Medicaid Direct Cert expanded to additional states. And encourage states on this call who are not part of the Medicaid Direct Cert pilot to go ahead and apply, because USDA is taking RFPs or proposals, and I think the deadline is September 30th. So if you aren't already participating, because it does go a long way in reducing the number of school meal applications that school districts have to process. We also are doing advocacy around state applications because we think it is easier for people to do outreach to promote filling out your free and reduced price school meal applications if there is like a one place where you can go to fill them out. But yes, we are very aware of some of the challenges around certifying kids for free and reduced price meals given the waivers, and so have been thinking about that quite a bit.
Thank you so much, Crystal, and to Sam for today's presentation. I know that I've learned a lot, and we're going to plan to send a follow-up email with the recording and the resources discussed, and we'll also be posting this recording to the FRAC YouTube channel. So I want to say thank you to everybody for joining us today, and I hope that you all have a wonderful rest of your day.